I got asked some questions about how I lifted this two-wheel drive G20 van. So I'm going to go over the fabrication that I had to do and the parts that I used and some fitment issues that you can expect to deal with. So we'll get right in there and I'll show you what I did. Okay, the main component of this lift is a 4-inch lift spindle. These were from Rough Country. They're made for a 1990 C1500. The primary difference that requires fabrication is that the bottom ball joints for the trucks are bigger. So what I did is cut the bottom bore out, made a new plate with that bore out of 1/2-inch plate. This isn't something that I would recommend doing if you're not experienced with fabrication, because if you do it poorly, it's, you're asking for an accident. So kind of, continue at your own risk. The second thing is the van tie rod ends come in from the top, whereas the truck tie rod ends come in from the bottom. So this has been tapered in from the bottom from the factory. And you'll have to get a 7-degree reamer and taper it in from the top. If you just put it in from the bottom, like I did the first time around, you will have a massive amount of bump steer to the point where it's undrivable practically. The thing about coming in from the top is obviously you're going to have a bore coming in from the bottom as well. This is a lot thicker section than it typically is for a factory spindle. So you can taper this in quite far. So that taper goes down like 2/3 of the way. So it's every bit as much of a taper to sit in for this tie rod end. Now that is a tie rod end for a 1/2-ton truck. You can put 3/4-ton truck tie rod ends in because they have all the same thread size. Problem is, you can see right here, there is no clearance whatsoever. These rims are 17x8s, I believe, with the 0 offset. I could be wrong. I bought them like 20 years ago, so if anything has changed, I wouldn't know. But that is kind of a primary issue. I guess the easiest way around that would be just run 18s or bigger. You're not going to fit 15s, obviously. This will get your steering geometry very, very close. I have the old spindle here, and if you see the orientation between where the ball joint mounts there and the tie rod mounts, it is pretty close to the same. I think I measured it a little different. I mean, it was like, I don't remember exactly, but it wasn't very much. So if there's any bump steer that's caused, you can't tell. I've been driving this thing back and forth to work for over a month now, and it actually rides fantastic. Now, to fit 35s, they don't actually fit with only a 4-inch lift. So you do have to either go with a taller spring or a spring spacer. And I did use a 1-inch spacer, which gets you about 2 inches of lift. So the total lift to fit 35s for a G20 van is about 6 inches. Now, obviously, since you're using truck spindles, all the brake components from there out are for the truck, rotor, pads, caliper, all that stuff. You also need extended brake hoses. Those were from Rough Country. And that's pretty much it. I'll say I'm super happy with the way that this drives. It's remarkable how little changed. The only thing is that the coil spacers did make it so there isn't as much droop. So if you do go over, into kind of a big bump, it'll feel like you're kind of falling over the backside of it a little bit. But for everyday normal driving on somewhat decent roads, it's perfectly fine, rides great. Now, it's worth mentioning Get up here for a second. It's important to mention that I went with 17 by 8 rims for a very specific reason. More importantly, I went with 8-inch wide rims for an important reason. Those spindles already push the tire out about 2 inches. In the back there, I'm running 2-inch spacers. Now, there's nothing that you can do about this. The problem is that if you go pick up rims that already have a negative offset on them, it's going to stick out so far. And I know some people like this look on like 3/4 ton trucks and stuff. It's going to make it ride terrible if you have a bunch of poke on one of these vans. As it stands, this rides just fine, but you better hold onto the wheel if you go charging through a puddle when it's raining or something, because it will pull quite hard. I do actually have the steering stabilizer that I'm going to put on eventually. Under normal driving conditions, it's fine though. But personally, I think that it would put a dangerous amount of strain on the tie rods and the ball joints if you go with a negative offset wheel, even like a negative 22 offset 10-inch rim. In the future, I do have some 18 by 9s as well as 20 by 10s that I'm going to try to fit, just see how they do. Those are both 0 offset rims, so it's not going to move the tire out at all. You do have to keep in mind when you get back under that you have very limited clearance to the spindle up there. Right now, there is about not even a finger width. And it does taper, you know, it does taper up. So I think that you might be able to fit maybe a 20 by 9, maybe a 20 by 10. If anybody's interested in me trying that out, because I'd have to pull them off of some of my other vehicles, I can try some of the different size and width wheels. Oh, it is worth mentioning too that this little tiny space, I actually did have to put 1/8-inch wheel spacers to get this to not rub. And I also had to move the rim mounted, or the outside lip mounted wheel weights to the inside with stick-on weights. So you've got very, very, very tight clearances on some things, and that's something to keep in mind. Otherwise, the back is just 4-inch blocks and an addle leaf. And then I don't remember specifically the size shocks, but you know, they're just truck shocks. Anyway, if there are questions, if I missed anything, let me know. I'm happy to answer. And thanks for watching.